Is that on? Oh, there we go. Okay, we're good to go. We're good to go. Look, thank you all being here. Apologies for the bit delays. We got the technical bugs worked out. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Richard Florzone, 11th President of Dalhousie, and thank you for being here today. We're here as part of the Budget Advisory Consultations. The Budget Advisory Committee is the group that I rely on and the board relies on to gather together administrators, faculty, students, to advise on the budget, to use a process of consultation and engagement. So it isn't just about the numbers, but also getting public input on the numbers and on the budget. Because ultimately our budget is about fueling our mission at Dal, right? So finding the best way we can use our resources to advance the university and the province. Look, I want to say right off the bat, I recognize that this conversation this year has been tougher. We are in, as always, the university is trying to balance a number of forces. We are committed to accessibility, to affordability, and to quality. And it's hard to balance all of that amidst weak public finances. So when we're in a period where government support isn't able to cover the costs of the institution, where there has been pressure on increasing tuition fees. We have been, over the last number of years, trying to keep those as modest as possible and to keep them competitive, because another principle is that we try to be comparable to the national benchmarks and what other institutions across Canada are doing. So before I hand it off, I just want to say to you that our commitment to you is, number one, to be transparent and accountable, because that's a hallmark of any good administration. Transparent and accountable mean transparent. You can see what we're doing, the decisions we're trying to wrestle with. Accountable, that we're here before you to take your questions and to respond to them, to consult. And also my commitment, and the commitment of my whole administration, to continue to work on this issue of affordability. That means working with federal and provincial governments on student aid, on support for the university, but also working with donors to garner more student support. We had a few announcements this year about new scholarship programs. We're going to continue to work hard on that, and of course to work with the student union on the overall funding for the university and the student aid environment in Canada and Nova Scotia. So with that, I want to hand it off. My role today, as I said, the BAC is a collection of faculty, administrators, and students who provide advice to me and through me to the board. So I'm here today to listen to all of you and to listen to what the BAC committee, where they are right now. Their report, the timeline, the tuition fees go to the board in their report will go to the board in April. It's usually the timeline, and the final budget goes in June. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our BAC committee for their commitment. And to this hard work. It's chaired by our Provost, Carolyn Waters, who you'll meet in a moment. Our VP Finance, Ian Nason, is also a key member of it. Ian was on his way back, and because of the high winds, he was coming back from University Business, and the plane wasn't able to land, so he wasn't able to join us. But thanks to him. I'll now turn things over to our moderator, DSU President Dan Nicholson, who will take us through the format and introduce Carolyn. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So my name is Dan Nicholson. I'm the president here of the Dalhousie Student Union. Before we move further, I just want to acknowledge that we are currently on unceded, unsurrendered Mi'kmaq territory, and I just wanted to say thank you to the Mi'kmaq people for allowing us to be here today. I'd just like to echo the sentiments that Dr. Florzone has brought up. Thanks to everyone for being here. It is really important that we can gather together and share our opinions and bring forward concerns and be very critical. So what's going to happen today, Carolyn is going to run through a 25-minute presentation, and then we're going to open it up for a 35-minute-ish Q&A session. We're going to try and limit the questions and answers to 1 minute apiece to try and get things going quickly, to get everyone heard, and to get some answers out to the people who are asking for them. Something to keep in mind, that this budget that's being proposed is only draft, so I encourage everyone to be as critical as you feel you need to be. Bring up as many concerns as you have. Feel free to share those. Thank you again to the BAC committee and Dr. Florzone for being here today, to be here and really to take in the opinions of the students and other folks who are here today. I think now I will turn it over to Carolyn. Excellent.
So I get the handy mic. I apologize to the people who've now been to 3 at least of these, so maybe you could do 4. All right, the prize. You get a cookie. But the idea here is that we're actually looking for input. So we're putting out a proposed budget. My God, I will tell the truth. We're putting out a proposed budget, and that means we're looking for new ideas. We're looking for things we might have missed. We're looking for ways that we can actually collectively figure out how to balance this budget. So I will go, it should only take about 20 minutes, but I'll go through the slides that we have been using so far. There we go. So the Budget Advisory Committee, as Dr. Florazone mentioned, is composed of staff and faculty and students, along with the Vice President of Finance and myself. I always get to chair it to make sure that it's actually aligned up with the academic mission of the university. So my job is always to say, and how is that good for the academic mission? Nonetheless, our number one task is to make sure that the budget is balanced. Dalhousie's board does not allow us to go into deficit, and so whatever we come up with must be balanced, and so keep that in mind. We try as much as possible to be very transparent, and so as we've gone through engineering and pharmacy and agriculture, we showed them all the data that we had and that we used. And I'd have to say in a couple of instances, they brought up some good points about how we might have interpreted it in a different way. And so all of that is useful. Our next task is, so this is our last consultation. The next task is to actually take in all the information that we have, run the models again, and then decide how we want to interpret that, partly for this budget, and partly some of the ideas are how we might improve the system as we go forward. So we're up for both of those. Okay, so let's just start out with an overview. Alas, I can't see both of these at the same time, so I have to look here. So revenue, 90% of the revenue comes from only 2 sources. The provincial government, which is about 52% of the budget, and it's up 1%. The tuition revenue, which is close to 38%, is the other big chunk. And before somebody asks, the rest is essentially from endowment funding that goes into very particular things like scholarships. Expenditures, on the other hand, so the things we have to pay for out of the operating budget, have gone up about 3.8%. And that is largely compensation, increases to student assistance, energy costs, general operating costs. So what do we have to do to balance the budget? So there's really only 4 things we can do. We can actually reduce the spending in the faculties and the service units. So we just put a cut on and tell people find efficiencies where you can. We can increase the tuition revenues, which we will come back to. We can reduce our spending. So we have, where we have discretionary money, we can actually be careful about how we channel and we use that for strategic purposes. And of course, we have some small amounts of reserve left that we can use to fill that last little bit of gap. We do have to be careful that once we spend that money once, it's actually gone. So how are we going to fix it the next year? So we'll come back to all of these, but that's pretty much all we have to work with. So if we look at an overview, we can see that the government grants went up 1%. So this is an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, with the provincial government, and it went up 1%, plus an increase of about $420,000 for graduate scholarships, so the total of $2.3 million, so an increase in revenue. Our expenditures, as I mentioned, went up 3.8%. Most of that is actually salary compensation, so that's staff, faculty, administrators, everybody's salary, and inflationary costs. So to be honest, there's not much that BAC can do about any of those 3. This year, however, we have proposed that we do some strategic new spending. The FAS initiatives, $500,000. Anybody here from FAS? Apart from Michael? Good. So FAS is, I think everyone knows, is undergoing a decline in enrollment. And this is not just at Dalhousie. It's not a Dalhousie problem. It's a regional problem, it's a national problem, and in fact, it turns out it's a continental problem. There's less pressure on people coming into FAST, and so we have a facility, if you like, that actually you can't change quickly, even if the student numbers drop off. So we have faculty who are tenured, we have buildings, we have classes that people need to take in order to graduate. We need to have a very strong FAST. And so we're proposing $500,000 in one time for that, which I'll come back to. We're proposing that we increase facilities renewal as a board initiative 7 years ago, that we start to increase that as the fabric of the university gets older and older. We're proposing that we actually put money aside for networking on all the campuses. So I don't believe there are many people in this room who don't data stream all the time and who don't have a phone and who don't use Netflix or whatever. And so that bandwidth capacity at this university is not up to date. And we're suggesting that we keep topping up our strategic initiative fund. So I will just give a little brief on those. So FAST. So the engineers had an interesting argument, which was just forget about them. I reacted fairly strongly to that because I think as a comprehensive U15 university, as people contributing to the economy of this province, we need a strong FAST. We actually need to have people who are thinking about policies and who are articulating long-term social complex issues. These people get great jobs. They are all over governments. They're in every company. There's a great market for these students. We perhaps have to help art students articulate their value better, and perhaps we have to differentiate our programs better. But we do have to facilitate the FAST people, the faculty members and the administration there, to think their own way out of this and to come up with their own ideas. They can't do that without having some money that they can use to seed some new programs. If we say, go and get more students, go and have different programs, you can't do that if you've got no capacity to take a faculty member and ask them to develop a new course or do video streaming or do new things. So we felt it was really, really important that we do this, and I have to say that over the last 2 years they have really stepped up and they are doing a lot of new program thinking on their own, and so we wanted to put this in to really help them. Facilities renewal, there is over $1 billion, $1.5 billion of buildings on these campuses that we have, most of them built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So none of you were here, so I can tell you that's a long time ago for a building. These buildings are now starting to really have serious maintenance problems. And it's certainly clear that it costs at least twice as much to fix something that's gone wrong, especially if it's water coming in or coming up. Very difficult. And so we have, since 2006, put an extra $1 million in a year. So at that time, there's only $2 million a year going in. And so now it's up to 19, I think. The goal would be closer to 30. I don't think that we're going to get there. But the committee felt strongly that we should continue to actually improve the infrastructure. Growth and network, I don't think I have to sell this one very hard. We really do need to start to think of an evolution and of a greening of our network facility. So we can't just think we're going to put in a new network and then forget all about it. So every year you have to make a commitment to actually thinking about your bandwidth needs. Do you have the right servers? Do we have Wi-Fi in enough areas? Is the Wi-Fi bandwidth high enough? When we start doing video capture in our classes, we're nowhere near where we need to be. So the last one is the Strategic Initiative Fund, and this is a fund that was started about 2005 or 6. And the idea was to start to actually build the infrastructure for student experiences and student support. And so the first round of this money went into actually building what we now see as student services. So it's hard to believe, but before then, apparently, there were virtually no student services. We didn't have a big office. We had very little around recruiting, very few advisors. We didn't have health system the way we have. So all of that has actually been built from these strategic initiative funds. So I just put up a few from just the last year. And so this is a fund that we have one-time money, so we can do a one-time project, or sometimes we need to actually put a new staff member in. And so when we do that, that comes out of that fund. It can't be spent again. So for example, if we have an ombuds person, which is we put money into this year to start in the fall, that budget goes from this into another budget area. And so that leaves less for the next year. And so what we're asking is, should we top it up? Should we leave it so that it actually stays the same? So some things I thought you might be interested in: the new Aboriginal health, the Aboriginal studies major, actually the new Black diaspora major minor is being funded from here, the learning management system, all of the big project to get proper AV in all of our common classrooms came from this fund. And student retention project and those programs are funded from here. So just some examples: our equity staff, our new diversity officer, and our new disability manager. Okay, so that's what we spent the money on. How are we going to balance the budget? So this is our proposal. So this is where you come in, so get out your notepads or whatever you're using. We're proposing the 3% increase, which is essentially covers the inflationary bump for the university. And that's the cap that the Nova Scotia government allows all of the Nova Scotia governments to use to increase the tuition. We're asking for market adjustment in 3 programs. And the market adjustment was an exceptional request by the Nova Scotia government to say programs that for which the tuition is lower than the national competitors, ask us, put in a proposal to increase that to be more nationally competitive. It's an odd way of using competitive, but closer to that average. And at Dalhousie, we chose 3 programs where rather than going across all of the programs, which is what all of the other universities did. So I will go through those and give you a little sense of why we thought that we would do that. It's not much of an increase, but it does, over time, will have a positive impact on those programs. One of the levers, as you recall, was to decrease spending in faculties and service units. So to balance the budget, we're proposing a 2.5% budget cut to all faculties and units, and $1.5 million worth of our reserve fund. So the reserve fund started at $8 million, and it's actually been spent down. It's probably a little 3.5-ish right now. So you can see that as we spend it out, somebody asked me the other day, why don't you just spend it all? I thought, well, that's great. Our problem will be solved, except for next year. We'd have dug a pretty deep hole. So I'll just save that question for you. Okay, so I'm not going to go through this sheet. This is revenue. The only thing I want you to notice is the $8 million at the bottom. So with all of these increases that I mentioned, so the 3% and the 3 market adjustments, the 1% from the government, we're an increase of $8 million in our revenue. Expenditures, unfortunately, are considerably more than $8 million. And you can see the impact of our compensation costs. So that's the salary and benefits for faculty and staff, which is the main expense that we have. $11 million. We add in our new initiatives and the increase in student assistance, and it comes to 15. So even without a calculator, you can see how we came to 2.5, because that's what we had to do to balance. And so that's the overview of the budget itself. And here, this is just sort of a perspective to give some sense of what are the big players here. So in terms of expenditures, it's really the faculty. The money at Dalhousie goes into the faculty and service units. It's very decentralized. So I promise, if you come to my office, there's no special bank account under my desk. But the money, I guess if you went to the deans, you might find it. But it's very decentralized. And so it's a different kind of hybrid system than in other universities. But here I think it works well because it puts the responsibility and the accountability in closest to where it needs to be spent and be resourced. In terms of revenue, you can see the impact of the provincial government. So over the last 10 years or so. So let me just talk briefly about the process for the tuition fees. So this is the market adjustments. This is not across the board. You can see we have the list of programs. I think it's in the back report, you can get it. But the ones that are circled are the 3 that were slightly out of whack. So I'm going to go to this one. You see a little gold bar. Little gold bar is the average tuition for that program for our competitive universities. And you can see that agriculture, engineering, and pharmacy are the ones that are most out of whack. Now, one could argue quite reasonably that where we have red and green dots outside of the gray box, they're anomalies as well, and why are we not bringing them down? So you can make that argument, but it goes to the same argument. At the end of the day, you have to balance, so maybe we just need to wait it out a bit. But so the green dot, which I hope you can see, the green dot is the tuition for out-of-province students, and the green dot is the tuition for Nova Scotia students. Because Nova Scotia students get what's called the Nova Scotia bursary. You may or may not see it, but it gets put into your account every year. So our goal is just to get a little bit closer. And in order to do that, it's interesting at Dell, particularly in these programs, that they don't actually have a tuition. So you don't actually pay just a tuition. You actually pay by the courses that you take. If you take more expensive courses, they cost more, and if you take cheaper courses, it costs less. And there's some magic calculator that figures out what size of check you have to write. And so the tricky part here is that we're only applying it to courses in the 3 programs. So if you're in engineering in the first year, most of your courses are in science, and so this doesn't apply. If you're in pharmacy, most of your courses are not in pharmacy in the first 2 years, and so this doesn't apply. If you're up at agriculture, however, all of their courses apply. And that's largely because at agriculture, their tuition is already artificially low, and so we're trying to rebalance that. This affects about 16% of the students. The rest of the students are not affected at all. And it's phased in over 3 years, and so you'll see the numbers. Those are the numbers per credit hour. It's about $40 a credit hour, but it's each year for 3 years to make it up. So I have one slide for each. Let me talk about agriculture. So agriculture program, those tuitions were when the government froze tuitions in 2007, were well below the rest of the universities in Nova Scotia. And so they got frozen there, and even with the recent 3%, they remain quite a bit lower. 24% lower than if you take an equivalent science course on this campus. And we try not to have a cost differential between our programs or between students taking the same program. 18% lower than Guelph, which is their closest competitor and kind of a national icon, if you like, and 15% lower than the national average. So there's some room to go there. So what we looked at was a 16.3% increase on a 3-credit hour course, and this works out at the end of the day to be about 14.9% more. So if you were a brand new agricultural student and you started this September, your tuition after the 3 years would be about 15% higher than if you'd started 3 years ago at the campus. This is independent of the 3%, so there's all sorts of ways of wrapping this thing up, which I'm not arguing against any of the ways of wrapping this up. It's an increase. Engineering is about 10% lower than the national average for Nova Scotian students. And all of our affiliated universities are moving their costs up. So for anybody who's not familiar with that, in Nova Scotia, you can go to Acadia or X or other places, and then after 2 years come here. So you pay the tuition at the other university, and they're going up. So the adjustment here is about it's 5% on those courses that they take that are engineering courses. It turns out to be about 10 point something. 10.5% more over the 3 year. Not insubstantial. I'm not diminishing this impact. Pharmacy is well below the national average, and we had an interesting discussion with pharmacy because many of the schools are going for what they call a D-Pharm, a doctorate in pharmacy, and some of those are really high. And there are a couple of Bachelor of Sciences, for example, at Memorial, which is ridiculously low. And so they made a good point that maybe we should only be looking at the Bachelor of Science. So those are the kinds of things that we have to put back through the model and look at. With an increase of 5% a year, that works out to about 10.9% overall, because not all the courses are pharmacy courses. And that actually still leaves them well below, even when I just do the back of the envelope Bachelor of Science ones, they're still below that. So that's more or less the thinking on that. When I went with the specific groups, we actually put the numbers up and we talked through the numbers, but I'm not going to do that here. So that's where we got to. Right, I said that. So this is the reset only. 3% counts in all events. It's enormously difficult to try and explain any of this if you keep throwing the 3% in. So let's just wrap up here. So these are the things that we have as a committee to work with. Nobody actually assigned to us the lovely task of reducing all expenses on campus. Nobody said to us, could you please fix all the faculty salaries? So this is what we're left to work with. We do have some latitude over tuition ups and downs. Faculty cuts, we can assign cuts to faculties and let them find efficiencies. We can give more or less to FAS. We can give more or less to the facilities renewal, just not to one of these buildings that's leaking. We can actually step up to our network improvements, or we can continue to ignore it. And we can continue to have money where we have some ability to put in better quality, to put in newer initiatives to actually allow our faculty and staff to actually build for tomorrow instead of just trying to hold on to today. We do have some small discretion over the use of the reserve funds until they're at zero. And there are some other ideas, and one of the great things about the consultations is that people give us other ideas. Did you think of doing X? And half the time we have, and the other half of the time, it's a good idea, let's have a look. So if you go to, well, if you don't go there, if you go to dal.ca/provost with 2 O's, then you will find the little budget calculator. And we invite everyone, as we have for the last couple of weeks, to actually go in and move those things around. And if you get a great solution, something that makes sense to you, take a screenshot and send it to back@dal.ca. At the bottom, on your left, you'll see that there's some other ideas. If you have something that's not in my list, for example, many students have said, we just need a lot more bursaries. Really, we do. And I've heard that this week, after even I'd done this. We just need a lot more bursaries. So, okay, if you have bursaries, what are we going to give up? Right? I'm all for bursaries, to say the least. And then a little wild card thing at the bottom that says, I've got something you haven't thought of. You know, let's sell the bricks in the sidewalk, or let's do something. But the only thing is, it's still got a balance. So there's really no point in saying, we want the government to pay more. We don't want any tuition increases. We just want to fire all the faculty. So that's not so helpful. But really, this is an opportunity to actually engage in the conversation, to actually put ideas on the table. There are ideas that you will have that we can't do this time, but will be great for us starting the next cycle. And one of the ideas that came out in one of the very first sessions was perhaps we should actually start to have a little task force that goes out there and actually steps way back and starts to think about what are the pieces of the budget? Why do we have so few levers to pull here? I'm going to get nauseous if I don't get those lights set. Okay, so I'll just leave it there. So that's the end of my presentation. And Kelsey has agreed. I don't know if it's necessary. Kelsey, do you want to moderate or? Okay, so Kelsey has agreed to moderate, and so she'll pick the questions. I'll pick the responders, so we'll tag team.
Hi, everyone. Most of you know me, but I'm Kelsey. I sit on the Budget Advisory Committee with these folks here as a student. So the way that we're going to do this today, and I apologize if Dan already said this, essentially is we're going to give students 1 minute to ask the question. We'll allow Carolyn 1 minute to respond, or if there's somebody else who's better suited to answer the question. And we've started a speaker list. I'll put a call out if anybody else would like to be added to that list. We'll keep it on going. Yeah, I can add you as well. Just give me 1 second. We'll keep it on going throughout the presentation, and I think we'll be able to keep things respectful this way. So I'll give this back to you. I think I can talk loud enough. So first on the speakers list, we have Rhiannon.
Oh, you want to use that one?
I don't have a question in particular. I have more of a statement. My name is Rhiannon Makahaniak. I'm a social work student in the health professions faculty. I'm not as affected by these tuition increases as much as engineering or pharmacy or agricultural campus, but I stand in solidarity with those faculties. Over the course of my 2 degrees here at Dal, I've worked 2 jobs for most of them, between 30 and 40 hours a week. I'm currently working 44 hours a week, 24 of which are unpaid field placement hours. So yeah, I stand in solidarity with Dal students, with engineering, pharmacy, and agricultural campus, with rejecting the reset, and with opposing tuition hikes.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Just don't throw the boxes at me.
Thank you, Rhiannon.
Who's next?
Up next, we have Masuma.
Okay. You're all close. We'll just use the same mic.
Hi, everyone. I'm a third-year Dallas student. I'm in poli-sci with a minor in IDS. And so each year, it's a struggle to pay tuition. I work more than 2 jobs just to try and pay tuition. My question is, how can you expect us students to pay for these hikes, regardless if it's 3% or 24%, while working jobs, while trying to maintain our grades, while trying to live our lives? Did you consider how it will affect our mental health, our relationships with our family and friends, our goals in our life? How are we supposed to survive? And how will you succeed with your academic mission if the majority of your students will be busy working instead of actually studying?
Fair question. A little rattle. So this is not to say that the back committee didn't actually consider this, that the back committee didn't go and say how much money are we spending on scholarships and student assistance, which is over $40 million. This is not to say that we're unsympathetic. What we're trying to actually say is that if we want this to be a university that you're proud to graduate from, we actually need to certainly cover the cost of inflation. And if we keep chipping away at the base, we can't afford to have poor faculty members. We actually need to come up with other ways of doing this. So I have 3 children. I fully appreciate the pressure on the students themselves, even more than on their parents, but actually on the students to make this work and to do well at school. I don't have a magic wand. All I can say is that we're very mindful of it, and any suggestions, particularly around better student, past time.
Okay, so up next we have Dylan. Thank you, Masuma.
3 times, Dylan.
I know, 3 times. Yeah, as you know, this is my 3rd time. So this time, I'd like to, actually I'm not going to target the Strategic Initiative Fund, but instead I'd like to ask what the surplus was last year, and I feel like someone over here might be qualified to.
Well, the person who's most qualified is in an airplane circling somewhere. So the surplus we used last year, Linda's here, I think it was 1.5 million. So we're trying to reduce it so that, no, we used one.
From last year.
Oh,
Last year's budget?
no, there was no surplus. Where's Linda? No. No, the surplus built up in the before 2010-ish, when the back committee, when there were more students showed up than they had projected, and so at the end of the year there was a surplus that went into this fund for that year, which has now come, when we don't have as many students as we were projecting. And so that's why it's a fixed pot, and we're not anticipating having surplus students here, certainly not in the short term.
Awesome. Thank you, Carolyn and Dylan. So up next we have Will.
Oh, well. Very persistent.
Hey. Oh, yeah, all the tweeting. So, yeah, I just have a question, I guess, kind of based off a statement you made on at the engineering consultation Monday? Yeah, Monday. So on Monday you said that that Dal didn't specifically request the provincial deregulation of the tuition resets. I guess this is a kind of a question for President Florazone, because you said you didn't know that, but does he know either anyone within who's specifically in it? Because we've heard generally the government decided to do that, but just trying to get any sense of more specificity as to who was deciding that?
And I think that, Ian, I stand by my statement. I certainly never suggested it. Do you know anything about it, Richard?
The discussions about tuition and the grant are kind of monthly meetings with Labor and Advanced Ed. It's a table called Excellence through Partnership. It's a collection of university presidents, a small group that meets with the Deputy of Advanced Ed, as I said, about every month, and then about once a quarter the whole group meets together. And it was through those conversations in the very tough environment where the broad outline was discussed about the grant and tuition. The difficulty with this topic is, of course, universities have the authority to set their own tuition rates through their boards of governors. So it's actually tough to answer your question about who asked and who approved, because, of course, it is in the authority of the province. Sorry, I said authority of the province, authority of the boards. Sorry, let me correct that last statement. So it's the authority of the boards.
Thank you. Okay, I can add you to the speakers list, Amber. Thank you. Up next we have Bart, but I don't see Bart in the crowd. I think he's in an interview right now with CKDU, so he'll probably be back after. So we're going to move along to Jeremy.
You must be Jeremy.
Yeah, I study urban planning in the Department of Architecture and Planning. It's a great program, love it. But I have some concerns about raising tuitions across the board, especially when operating budgets have been decreasing for a number of years. The Faculty Association noted this has been an ongoing trend, and over the past 3 years alone, $83 million has been transferred to a capital fund. In my department, I have a class where there's 70 students and only 60 seats, meaning 10 of those students are on desks or standing. Last year, that same classroom flooded. And we talk about the ideas building being built next year or the year after. Some faculty on Sexton campus speak about the ideas building as an idea that has happened 13 years ago. So my question is really, when are we actually going to address these both academic operating issues as well as the capital issues?
So two parts to the question. So the first part is this moving of money to build things as though the operating budget is being spent on these buildings. So we're going to answer that one first, because that is completely not true. No, buildings aren't built by taking $83 million out of the operating budget. We would surely notice it if it was missing. Around your second point, I'm going to pass it right over to the president.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but that is a bright spot in all of this. It's pending. Obviously, we have to bring it to the board, but we have put a tremendous effort into the idea building. We've received great response from donors. There's a major gift that I hope that we'll be in a position to announce and be publicly confirmed in the next couple of months. What the provost and I are really committed to, along with the dean of engineering, is to break ground this year. 2016 is what we are working very, very hard on. I will say this is all subject to board commitment, but it is what this administration is dedicated to. Thank you.
Keep us online.
It's kind of a fun game. Okay, so just in time, we'll actually have John.
So I want to follow up on the conversations about surpluses and drawing on the financial statements from 2014-15 that were published. We see that there's Dalhousie had a revenue of $652.7 million and expenditures of $624.3 million for a surplus of $28.45 million.
From the financial statements? Not the operating budget. Yeah, from the annual financial statements. I can't really comment on that. And Ian's not here. Linda, can you comment on?
I can't really comment on the specifics because the operating budget is what we look after in this committee.
I can commit to get Ian when we get him on the ground.
I will, because I used to be a VP Finance. The problem with consolidated budget is you have different funds. So you have funds that are received in a year that aren't necessarily expended in that year. So you might receive research funds that are received in one year but then are dedicated to be spent over many years. So they never line up exactly. You also often have, and again, I don't know the details of the accounting, but at my previous institution, you have things like pension adjustments that would come and fluctuate things up and down. So on a consolidated basis, it's very tough to reconcile revenue and expenditure. The money we have, the flexibility we have that aren't dedicated funds, in a research account that have some conditions attached to them, or in an endowment account that has something attached to it, is in the operating fund, and that's the focus of BAC, and that's the focus of today.
Thank you. So up next we have Amina.
Amina, you can just.
Hi, my name is Amina Boaji, and I'm from the Faculty of Computer Science, studying informatics and international development studies. I'm currently taking 6 courses while working a full-time job to make ends meet. I'm a visible minority, and I come from a low-income family. And while I do want to acknowledge that I am privileged to attend this institution, I want to use this platform and this opportunity to voice that many people, especially from marginalized communities, face barriers to accessing education. And these increases further those barriers. So how are you reconciling these increases with the recent recommendations from the 5 diversity and inclusion reports? Thank you.
So thank you for that great question. So we have been responding quite targeted, in quite a targeted way to both diverse groups and to lower income students. So over the last 2 years, our scholarship process has been redone so that it's not just on marks. There's actually a big component of that's sort of needs-based, so that we actually change the balance of bursaries to scholarships as we're going forward. The Kevin Hewitt and Amy Bombay report on scholarships in particular, the Associate Vice President academic is leading a group to actually look at how we get those things actually implemented. So it is top of our mind. It just takes a little while to get there.
Thank you. So Bart, I've added you again to the speakers list. I'm just going to make another call to see if there's anybody else who'd like to be added at this time. Okay. All right. And moving along, Bart, I'm just going to add you to the bottom just as you had stepped out. So we'll go along to Caitlin.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Lowe, and I've currently been attending these budget advisory consultations every year for the past 4 years because I'm a student paying for my education and living expenses on my own by working a combination of full-time and part-time jobs while being a full-time student. And after the years, I've seen students forced to pay more and receive less year after year, which is fundamentally wrong. Here you are asking students to pay even more to still receive less. My question is about what is being done, if anything, to evaluate our current enrollment resource-based allocation funding model. As the university administration yourself has said, enrollment is indeed a factor to be considered when considering the province's funding model to allocate money to universities. But what is being done to address this issue in our university itself? It seems irresponsible to use an enrollment-based model when Dalhousie is struggling to retain students, especially after these proposed changes go through. Experiencing only slightly increases to overall enrollment and continuously declining enrollment from students straight from high school. Students cannot afford these increases.
Josh. The Dean of Engineering is leading the deans and looking at URBA.
So we have, there have been several reviews of the URBA model, and we're just coming through another one. I'm chairing that process. Realistically, I mean, as programs grow, we need more resources to put them on. The classrooms, we need more classrooms, we need more faculty, we need more TAs. So the enrollment-based allocation is supposed to address the fact that if you have 200 students in a program, you need more TAs than if you have 50 students in a program. There are nuances around that, and certainly we recognize, we've heard lots of advice around it. It's tremendously difficult for programs as they shrink. So for instance, FAS is shrinking. This year, that's one of the reasons that there was an extra piece in the budget allocated to FAS rather than to handle the urban maze problem issue, but it's under review.
Thanks so much. Up next, we have Drew.
The university is decreasing spending by 2.5%, yet raising tuition by 26% over 3 years, if counted for year-over-year increases. Currently, Sexton campus has issues such as water damage, whiteboards that don't erase, and classrooms which pose safety hazards due to overcrowding. In addition, the Faculty of Electrical Engineering specifically has decreased funding for TAs so far that the classes in second year have to choose between assignments and labs as they don't have enough TAs to mark both. My question is, how does Dalhousie justify raising tuition when it already fails to provide the services it advertises? Second question. In addition, you have not chosen to decrease your largest cost, which is compensation. You continue to increase it faster than inflation. Caroline, will you commit to recommending a lowering in compensation as part of your academic mission when doing collective bargaining next round?
I'm not on the collective bargaining. I can recommend anything. But Ian's not here. I'll let the president speak to that for a moment, but I'm going to ask Josh to speak to the engineering services.
So first off, there's a 2.5% cut. It's not an actual 2.5% cut. It's a 2.5% cut after there's an adjustment for inflation. So there's actually an adjustment. It's actually about a 1% increase, not a 2.5% cut. Certainly, collective bargaining, the university works hard to pay their faculty as little as they can, but realistically, if you want to get good faculty members, you have to pay them fair market value. And Dalhousie does pay close to fair market value. It pays the fair market value for the region, but by national standards, we're actually our faculty members are not overpaid. And getting good faculty members is something the university is completely committed to, and negotiating with salary. If you want good people, you have to pay them, is ultimately.
Just on the second question, just to say, look, I hear you, that is our largest cost, but the challenge is recruiting and retaining the best faculty. And the issue is, I'm deeply concerned about student affordability. I'm also deeply concerned our ability to attract the best faculty. And in many cases, we aren't as competitive as it could be. I will say one bright light on this is a number of faculty have stepped forward now. It started by the English department, it's spread elsewhere. I've been part of it myself in establishing scholarships for our students. But the challenge is, if we want to have the best academic experience here, we need to be able to attract and retain the best faculty, and that means compensation.
Okay, and just to let students know, because we did start late, we're not going to stop right now. We'll go until probably about quarter after, maybe 20 after, depending on if questions allow. So up next we have Sajam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was wondering if I may make some suggestions or for consideration. I'm glad that we got together here, and I hope that we could find some resolution. Would you consider one option, which is modeled on the University of Toronto's model, where you have the option of paying the exam fee only, if you wish, and or hiring a professor or TA from their pool of candidates per hour on an hourly basis is one option for people who can't afford. That's one. And because I had a private tutoring business for some time, I would be confident or come to hear of international students' problems. One of the problems they told me as to why they don't wish to come to Dalhousie is they feel that 1 or 2 more transfer credits could have been accepted, whereas when they applied to Ontario, they had more transfer credits. So if you want to find a revenue resource, that's one valuable resource to try to attract that crowd back. And also try to have more partnerships with international universities so that you could do part diploma here, part diploma elsewhere, and see if you could gain credit at a cost reduction if that university offers lower tuition.
Thank you. Great suggestions. So I'm going to start at the end because that's the way I remember best. So we have begun in the last 3 years to have an international strategy, and we are focused exactly on how do we actually do articulation and joint degrees around the world, and we've got, I don't know, probably 15 or 20 that we're working on, so that's a great suggestion. I really like the first suggestion about just paying to write off the exam. I don't know how that would work out, but it is a good suggestion. And this articulation, we have not just articulation problems with international universities, but with community colleges and with other universities. So in Nova Scotia, we led a consortium to actually look at transfer of credit for credit, even within the province. So we're actually working on that, and it's a great suggestion, and it just means that we're not asking people, do it again, or we'll just put it on your transcript, but you don't get it in your GPA. What's that all about? So they're good suggestions, and I've got Kim's over here writing them down, so we'll bring them back.
All right, and we're moving along here.
Hi, yes, my question is, I'm an international student, so I'm very, very aware of how this affects a lot of people, including myself. It's very strange that on the charts on the board, a greater percent of the revenue that Dow is, a greater percent of Dow's expenses are going toward faculty and administration. Meanwhile, the people that spend the most while on campus and to be on campus at Dow are not represented in the faculty. There's very minimal. I haven't been around a lot of professors that understand, or administrative people that understand what is happening in marginalized communities, and these are the people that are making the decisions for people, and it's unproportional. It doesn't make any sense that people are spending a lot of money to come to Dalhousie, to be at Dalhousie, suffering a lot of pain while on campus, and this university does not support them in any way. It's very damaging, and it creates a very hostile environment for students on campus. So irrespective of whether or not compensation is as high as it should be, or there are quality teachers, the quality, in order for something to be quality, it has to, it has to respect the people that are supporting it.
Okay, thank you. I don't actually have an actual articulated response to that, but we do take note of your comments, and thank you.
All right, next we have Amr, if you'd like to join us up here.
I have a question regarding international students, especially in engineering. Dal has a problem with retention. And I know personally few students who are here on grants and they decided that they are not actually going to continue at Dalhousie. What is the plan with students who are actually planning to drop out because of the increases? The second thing is, what's next? So this year you've increased tuition. What's happening next year? You are going to face the same increases in expenditure. So where is the gap in funding going to be covered next year? Are you planning to increase tuition every year to cover this, or is there another contingency plan to cover this?
So first, I guess I didn't make it clear. This was a one-time only missive from the government, from the provincial government. We cannot reset things as we wish. The 3% inflation thing is quite likely, but it's undetermined to be there. I might let Josh speak to engineering.
Regarding, I'm not sure what I can add.
Okay, he can't add anything. Yes, and so just in case you didn't hear, there international students, there has been no regulation, and we have not increased those fees other than the 3% for several years, and we have actually no intention of doing that.
I mean, I will say with respect to international student fees, Dalhousie's got some of the lowest international student fees in Canada. So, for instance, an international student going to do engineering at University of Toronto is $53,000 Canadian. And we offer a similar program to University of Toronto, very similar program. So I think the international tuition, as I say, if you compare us against all of the U15 universities, you'll find we're lower.
Thanks, I forgot that point.
Thank you both. Okay, we have Bart up next.
Hi, my name is Bart Soroka. I attend the law school here. I was fortunate enough to be able to discuss with two of our younger professors what their life looked like when they graduated Dal. They were offered 2 major corporate firm jobs and were able to turn them down and go work for the public good because their student debts weren't outrageous. Students that I go to school with today will not have that opportunity, and this is going to cost students and everyone in Nova Scotia access to justice. I also want to talk to some students about what effect it might have on them, but then I realized the most important students that this is affecting aren't here. The people that you price out of Dalhousie who aren't able to bring their diverse opinions and aspects to our school means we will not have a diverse law society, which means we will not have a diverse bench, which means we have to continue with the outrageous justice system that we have today. So your prices now reflect and ripple out way farther than just within these buildings. Thank you.
Good points, well made. I would just remind everyone that our law school has the IB&M, the Indigenous Black and Mi'kmaq Scholarship, which brings 10 new law students a year into the law school, free tuition. So we are, it's a well-established, long-standing program, I think maybe 20 years. So it doesn't do enough, but that's the kind of thing we need to raise, that the president and the advancement vice president are out raising money for. So thanks.
Thank you. All right, we're headed over here. Patrick, right? Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Waters. So it's no surprise to anybody that enrollment of students from Nova Scotian high schools has decreased. Additionally, that decreased funding from province is why we're in the situation we are in today. I think that's fairly obvious. But I think that it's also, I think we can agree that it is somewhat financially irresponsible for a company to spend more than they're actually taking in each year. I think also you can see a direct correlation in a decrease in students with an increase in tuition. So this is not a viable option into the future. So my question, I guess, is what options are we going to have looking forward? One of those options being lobbying between the university and students, which I talked to on Wednesday, which maybe President Florzone can speak to. Additionally, we keep talking about national averages. I think we can see globally that there is an unfair balance between the amount that students are paying and the amount that we can earn outside of school. Our earnings are going down while our spendings are increasing. Why isn't Dalhousie pushing to be a front runner, to be a school on top of the other ones, offering a great service of education for a great price rather than trying to pander to the average? Thank you.
Well, I'm not going to go into the Walmart model, but I'm going to ask the president.
Well, I'd just say, look, I would love to be that leader. The fact is that half of our operating support comes from government, and the government support per student is among the lowest in the country, right? Now, what can we say about that? We're in a province that will receive this year $1.7 billion in equalization from the rest of the country. They're having trouble because half of their budget's eaten up by healthcare. I'm not here to make excuses for government, but the fact is there isn't a big pot of money there either. So again, it comes back to balancing these forces. How do we ensure accessibility? How do we ensure affordability? But how do we also maintain quality and balance the books at the same time? It is very difficult. I sincerely respect all of the opinions that we've heard here today. And it involves a compromise. It does. It involves a compromise of tuition increases, but working with donors and working with government to increase support for the institution.
Thank you. All right, next we're heading here.
Hi there, my name's Justin. I'm with the law school. My question is in regards to the market adjustment. So the university, from what I understand, it looks at comparable schools in order to determine where it has the average, where it stands amongst them. Now, my question is in regards to what factors does the university use in terms of determining what is the average comparable school, and if you can elaborate more, what are these comparable schools that you're elaborating on?
List for engineering. So it's roughly the same schools, but for each different program, only those schools that have that program. But engineering, they're pretty much in engineering, so you can't read that. But I can post that when I post. So it is a standard list. It's from CALBO, which is the Canadian, I don't know, what's CALBO mean? The Canadian Association of Universities. There must be a B in business officers. There's finance people. So there's this standard, and so when we say the tuition at X, that's where this tuition comes from.
Sorry, maybe it's not quite clear, but what's the comparable factors for a comparable school?
Well, they would be comprehensive, so that means they have medical, and pretty much. So U15 for sure. And then some other schools that may not be in the U15 but are roughly the same size and the same research-intensive universities. So we don't actually compare ourselves with strictly undergraduate universities. So the graduate programs, professional programs like law, these programs are expensive to put on, so you want to have a better comparator.
Get you to explain what the U15
Oh,
is.
Great. Okay, so U15, there are 15 comprehensive research-intensive universities. So comprehensive means it has medicine, dentistry, law, and everything else. Research-intensive means that the faculty members, by and large, 40% of their job, more or less, is to do research. So we expect research productivity. The province expects research productivity, expects engineers and people to get things out. So there's 15 of them, and they're comparable, and they meet, and they cooperate.
Thank you. So Dylan was next, but has opted to be pushed down, so we can pass the mic back to you. Thank you.
Well, I have a comment about the comparison. I think that Dalhousie should stop comparing itself to a lot of the universities on that list, because there's a lot of adjustments that need to be made in the comparison. A lot of the provinces where these universities are located are more receptive to diverse opinions. And unfortunately, Dalhousie is not as receptive to diverse opinions. There's a lot more representation of a lot of different kinds of people present at these universities as faculty, student, staff. So it's not realistic to compare Dalhousie to these schools, because the situation of Halifax, Nova Scotia is very different from that of a lot of these schools in a lot of these provinces. And I know I've been to a lot of these campuses. I know a lot of the students that have been to these universities. So it's when making comparisons, adjustments need to be made, especially when it affects student lives.
Thanks. We just have time for one last question. Did you want to say something? Sure.
Look, I just want to say on the comparisons, those are the universities we compete with for students. But I want to say to your point how important this is to me, diversity and inclusiveness. You've seen a lot of movement this past year. You also saw in the budget that one of our main changes was new funding for our new executive director, diversity inclusiveness. We're committed to making this a more representative institution, a more welcoming institution, because we think it's important to Dal and we think it's important to the province. So I want to recognize your point and talk about how important it is to us and to the future. Thank you.
Okay, we're having one last question.
So we actually have one other person on the speakers list. Okay, so we'll
Yeah,
see
that
how
gives
long
us
this
2
goes.
questions.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you. I was wondering, just 3 quick points, if there could be more standardization of the grant-paid research positions between professor and student, so that students could have more job opportunities on campus and help pay for their tuition. That's one. And the other one is if there could be more partnerships with human resource development, for example, and get a portfolio type of recognition for your work and other skills in terms of a transfer credit and or right challenge exams, written or oral, and modeling the Athabasca University about an improvement upon that. And that would be one way of cutting down the tuition, because you'd have almost like a prior learning experience, transfer credit inherent in that process. So those are the 2 main points that I wish to make, and I would hope that you consider this. Thank you.
Oh, great points. I may have to find you later to come and talk to us.
Thank you very much. It's mostly a statement. So what I have to say is, so we actually had a solution, but unfortunately we missed our chance, and I'll say I'm here on behalf of Divest Dal. So a recent report came out which found that U of T lost $550 million over 3 years by not divesting from fossil fuels. U of T is obviously a much larger university, but I think by comparison, and we would have similar investment strategies, we could assume Dal lost quite a few, probably millions. And so we've actually asked Ian Nason on the investment committee to give us the numbers we need to run those same calculations. He's been awfully aloof. He hasn't given us those numbers for some reason. I can't imagine why. But in the interest of looking at options that we have for a university, to look at all possible options, I was wondering if Ian Nason, I know he's not here, would be willing to give those numbers so we can run those calculations. Thank you.
Well, I can't speak for Ian, but I'm pretty sure we didn't lose money last year. Our investments.
Not the investments overall, but I suspect I know what you're getting at. There's a percentage that's in, and we've been open about this. I think it's 4% that was invested in the fossil fuel company. I can't remember the exact number, but that's probably the number you're looking for. Anyway, when Ian's back, I'd encourage you to send him an email, and if there's, yeah. So I can't speak to the specifics. We try to be as open and transparent as we can, and I know Ian will respond if you want to send another message.
Yeah, send the message to back@dal.ca, and then it gets in the right pool.
So with that, we're going to close questions. I appreciate everybody sticking around. Thank you so much for your feedback. On a final note, 2 things. First off, if you have any other questions or comments, please email. It's back@dal.ca, and you will be responded to promptly, and all your considerations will be kept. And as one other final thing, there's actually a statement that was prepared by the Student Union. Much like last year, it's just the priorities of the students, so we'll get John to give you a copy.
And again, just as a final note, we really are looking for input. So we will start meeting again next week. So we like the input. Kim took your notes, but please do. We take everything very seriously at the committee, and we will run our numbers, and we'll be back with a final draft.
And I think you might have, did you want to address the, yeah. Oh, there you go.
This is hot off the presses, ready for all members of the committee here. It's a report in response to the Budget Advisory Committee from the Student Union titled Don't Shut Us Out, a student response to the Budget Advisory Committee. And it makes some series of recommendations around transparency in the committee, strategic investments, building an equitable campus, and addressing government underfunding by working with students. So a series of recommendations. I hope you give it a read in consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
And thank you, Kelsey.
No problem.
This will also be available online, dsu.ca/advocacy.
Thanks, Kelsey.
Awesome.
Really
Thanks so much.
appreciate it.